Welcome, IT changemakers, to the Dex Show with Tim Flower and Tom McGrath. Let's get into it.
Hello, changemakers. Welcome back to Reality Bytes. It's been a minute, but we've got a slightly smaller crew on board, but we've got a great episode theme. We got Oriana, we got Sean, and we got Tim Flower as well. And one of the reasons we've been away from the microphones here on Reality Bytes for a few weeks now, I think, is that we launched Parallel, Tim, the IT mystery series. If people haven't heard it already, tell them a little bit about it.
Yeah, even as you're talking about it, Tom, I love just the naming that we came up with, because it's a parallel podcast to what we're normally doing, right? We had the little brainstorming session on how we could maybe bring some creativity to the air and maybe bring a little levity and lightness. So I was always a big fan of the podcast. I think it was about 10 years ago, called Serial, a murder mystery of a teenager, a real story of a teenager who went missing, and a podcaster who dug into the investigation. She had a very unique cadence, a very unique style of interview, real cool intro music. And it was just a real fascinating thing back then. And it struck me that, we're always investigating things in IT. Why don't we look at it as a murder mystery? And, the name Parallel has so many different connotations. One, it's the technology, the sister technology to a serial cable. It's a parallel cable, but it's also the reverse of the serial name on the podcast. There's so many different really cool ways to look at it. But it's just a five episode kind of fun, tongue in cheek spoof on Serial, and gives us a little creative outlet to have a little bit of fun. So hopefully folks can find it and chuckle along with us.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of the qualities there, Tim. Great cadence, terrific music. Reminded me of your work on Parallel, and not just your work, but the whole team's work. There's a few different voices on there. Tim has us all acting, ladies and gentlemen, if you can believe that. And if you haven't already heard it, you can find episodes 1 and 2 on the Dex Show main feed. And what's your recommendation for searching for it, Tim? Because I remember when I went into Apple Podcasts, I put in Parallel by itself. There's a few different shows called Parallel. It's a bit confusing. What's the official rec if you're trying to find the home of the show?
I did find a couple of those other ones too, and I don't know that there's any active that are called Parallel, but I just search on Parallel, Nexthink, and those two will come up. Search on my name, it should come up.
Yeah.
But any combination of a couple of those searches, and you'll find it.
Excellent.
Or what the other place is, go to the Dex Hub, and you can find it on our website.
Absolutely. And I will just say, we've been getting, making the episodes available and getting great response so far. So there may be some more Parallel episodes appearing on the Dex Show feed as well in the coming weeks. But for now, let's come back to a Reality Bytes discussion. And we've got a great reason to come together and break bread again. Because regular listeners might recall the episode we did a few weeks ago now, Productivity in 2025, New Insights on AI, Dex, and Adoption. And those new insights were courtesy of part 1 of our IT's new mandate, the Science of Productivity 2-part report based upon exclusive Vance and Bourne research. The second installment of that report is called The Experience Silo, HR, IT, and the Digital Workplace. It came out 2-3 weeks ago, and we're very lucky. We're always very lucky to have Nexthink senior editor and report author Sean Malvey on the Reality Bytes team. So who better to invite to tell us a bit about it? How you doing, Sean?
Not too bad, and happy Friday to everybody during this recording.
And if you're listening to it on Tuesday when it comes out, unhappy Tuesday, I guess. Bring us up to speed with this report, my friend. How is it different from part 1? Who was targeted, and what were the main findings that stand out?
Yep, sure thing. So same audience as the part 1, 1,100 senior IT leaders spread across 4 different countries, the US, France, Germany, and the UK. And in the first part of the report, part 1, we were focused on AI and digital transformation and how that was going to make us more productive and answering big picture questions. But in part 2, we wanted to focus in on who's going to actually own the employee experience. And we've known this for a couple of years now, but HR and IT have had a lot of overlap over the past couple of years. So we wanted to kind of dig into that topic, and that's exactly what we did in part 2. But I'll just give you a few of the main takeaway right now. So 64% of the senior IT leaders that we surveyed came back and said that the merger is definitely going to go down within the next 5 years. About 31% think it's going to happen in the next 3. Another 33% think it's going to happen sometime between 3 to 5 years. And then there was another close to a third of respondents who think that no merger in name is going to happen, but the two entities will be more collaborative in practice.
Was that a surprise, Sean? What were you anticipating out of that particular data point or response?
Yeah, I think so. I think people naturally say 3 to 5 and just put it off as like that could be 200 million years away, So I think that, but I was actually surprised later on when we dug into some of the country data to see how they felt within the next 3 years, because 3 years in a tech company can actually fly by. But I think 5 years is sort of a safer answer. And some people do feel like the merger is coming sooner than later.
And I think when I read the reports, I felt like, particularly in tandem, I felt like there's a real relationship between the confusion around the areas of responsibility that IT is increasingly assuming, covered in part 1, which we call the science of productivity itself, if you will, and the confusion that's come from this kind of new area of technology management in terms of who's responsible for what. I mean, is there evidence of that confusion in the data in part 2?
Yeah, certainly. So, I mean, we could probably think of it even without looking at the report, but there were 3 specific topics that came to mind: employee satisfaction, overall like enterprise productivity, and then employee engagement. And a lot of the leaders said that they actually felt that both HR and IT should own all 3 of those variables. There wasn't like any clear indication, I'll put it this way, there wasn't any clear indication that like everybody feels that one department should own it versus the other. You know what I mean? So there was a lot of confusion across those 3 different variables. And then to take it even further, we asked them, well, if they were to merge, what would be some of the biggest challenges that you'd foresee? And 50% of respondents think that there'd just be poor communication between HR and IT, so they'd have to solve that problem. And then just differing priorities between the departments. Historically speaking, these are very different. You couldn't be more different between HR and IT. So they would have to iron out those issues before any actual merger were to occur.
Yeah, it's something of a Tinder. I mean, it's hard to think of many other areas in a corporation where there's that much contestation over who's actually owning things as significant as the report covers. And I know you're currently in the sort of last stages of producing sort of individualized reports in different languages, reflecting the results from different territories. They're coming out in a few weeks, I think. What if you can give us a sort of a foreglimpse of those? What do IT leaders in those 4 different countries that you're covering in those other reports, how do they think differently about the possible merger?
Yeah, for sure. So after people listen to this recording, those reports will come out throughout the summer. Just like personally speaking, I didn't want to include it all in the part 2 report. I think it would have been too much, but they're very interesting, the country breakdown. So from the US, the UK, Germany, and France, because you get like kind of the cultural, political, the market context to what might explain some of the data that we collected. And when it comes down to the merger, it was interesting. In the US and Germany, they were less willing to say that like the merger was going to happen in the next 3 years. They were kind of hedging their bets and saying, well, maybe in 5 or maybe never, but they'll be more collaborative. And I think one possible explanation, let's talk to the US first, is that we have like a lot of obviously state labor laws, and employment is tied to your healthcare in the US. So that could be one factor that kind of complicates any type of merger. And in Germany, just in general, the sentiment that we found through our research was that, things are more long-term focused and they're a little bit more conservative with some of these mergers and huge digital transformation projects. But conversely, in the UK and France, nearly half of all leaders came back and said that they think a merger is going to happen in the next 3 years. I don't really have a strong evidence as to why that might happen, at least in the UK. But in France, I do know, like, I think they have a policy. The translation would be like quality of working life, basically. So it's written into law. And I know they have, even legally speaking, like a right to disconnect. So holistically speaking, that culture in government is focused on different ways to make work life better. And one of those ways to make work life better is, digitalizing your company and possibly merging HR. That's one theory that we had.
Amazing, connecting it to the well-known French predilection for not working through the month of August, which we all enjoy. We all enjoy as colleagues. Yeah, excellent. What job title in your existing do you think would be best at leading this new department, and why, Sean? What types of personality traits, skill sets, etc. should that future leader really embody?
Yeah, sure. So overall, about the majority kind of split between a couple different roles. They feel like whoever's going to lead this merger, 40% said that they think it would be an entirely new role, like a chief employee experience officer, something that you don't typically find nowadays in LinkedIn. And then there was almost a third of respondents felt like the CIO is positioned to take that responsibility. And then, of course, that we had like a chief human resources officer, got like the least amount of responses. And then a chief operating officer, which oddly, across all the 4 countries only got 15% of responses. But when we looked at France, for some reason, I think they got the majority of respondents felt like the chief operating officer is positioned to take over of any type of merger, which I thought was interesting. I do not have an explanation why that is, but could have been just like an English translation type of thing. But in terms of like the personality and the skill sets, for like any sort of DEX director role, I think it just has to be anyone has a really strong understanding of like real-time analytics, automation, obviously has a strong IT background, but someone who also likes to solve problems based on sort of user feedback and sentiment data, and likes to essentially blur the lines between people and technology. As simple as that.
Pretty well said, Sean. Thanks, mate. Tim, if a merger does take place, interested in your view of that or expectations of that. Respondents predicted that 3 principal challenges might stand in its way: lack of clear ownership for new existing responsibilities, poor communication between the current 2 entities, and differing priorities. What are some things that IT and HR leaders can do now to remedy these problems, not only in anticipation of this merger, which may or may not arrive, but just in terms of facilitating better collaboration and better outcomes for employees?
So I looked at the concept of a merger the same way I look at companies merging, and there's kind of 2 different ways that they go about doing it. One is kind of like what we did with AppLearn. You buy the other entity and you fully absorb it into your team, so it becomes one entity. The second merger, M&A, on a company standpoint, is you buy the other company and they act as either parallel, side by side, independent entities or a subsidiary, but they remain their own entity while they're part of the bigger whole. And I looked at, my opinion is, IT and HR are not going to become a single combined unified entity where you have teams with HR and IT accountabilities combined. I believe that HR and IT will come together under one leader, and they will then force organizationally and operationally more collaboration, more cohesiveness under a single leader. So that's the context that I looked in at it, and I agree that those 3 hurdles still exist. But in terms of the first one you talked about, ownership, I and I'll restate what I just said, because I firmly believe that an org should consist of a single leader across those new teams, and ideally, and Sean touched on a little bit of this, that leader should have prior experience managing these 2 teams together. I'm not a fan of taking somebody from HR and making them the leader, or somebody from IT and making them the leader, because you've got instant potential, I'll call it conflict. You've really got to have a leader who can define ownership of accountabilities, set clear communications, goals, priorities. These all start at the top. So I think that you've got to combine in that leader somebody who can manage that, and also somebody who's a good collaborator themselves and can reach out to the organization and get feedback. And in terms of ownership, everyone on that new combined team needs to feel that they're a part of that new team and not one owning the other. And I don't think that this should result in, for instance, IT reporting to HR or vice versa. So ownership with single leadership, I think, hits the first hurdle that you talked about. The others are kind of combined. Communication, and no offense to my teammates or peers or anyone in either of these organizations, but as departments that serve the entire employee base, both of these corporate functions can carry negative opinions by employees. Not always, and not everybody, but there are times where these departments are the ones that you love to hate. And right? So I wouldn't compound that problem by missing the opportunity to communicate both to the new teammates, but you're also servicing every employee. So you've got to your communication goals and your communication hurdle is not just with your new teammates in these two teams, it's with every employee. And the way I look at it is this in communication. It doesn't solve everything, but a lack of communication can break everything. So you've got to have a person and a part of this merger and program that is solely focused on communicating internally and to the external population. And the reason for that is these teams need information, right? They've got to understand what the goals are, why they're important, and how I, as an individual and my department, contribute to those goals. So communication, I think, is critical. And it comes from all areas, and it can't, a lot like Nexthink, it can't be a hobby. It's got to be a core part of the project. And I think the last one was around priorities and goals and competing goals and priorities.
Differing priorities.
Yeah.
That's right.
So I have experience in this kind of a thing at my prior employer. And like I alluded to earlier, it was not a merger. It was an acquisition. IT reported to finance. And what happened in that merger, in that acquisition, was that it reinforced the fact that IT was a cost center with expenses that needed to be controlled and managed and reduced. It didn't form the basis for collaboration with finance, and it certainly didn't improve the reputation with the business. It caused increased stress in IT because we were reporting to the bean counters and it wasn't about technology anymore. So you've got to look at your combination of these teams in the right way. And in terms of kind of getting past that hurdle of goals and priorities, you've got to make sure that you're not just setting goals for the team, but you've got to talk about and drive toward desired outcomes. And Sean, the report does a really good job at drawing these out. Productivity, onboarding, enablement, adoption of new technology, training, engagement, retention. It's all the outcomes that you're trying to drive for this. You need to make sure that people understand that this is not just moving the deck chairs around the Titanic. This is a bigger deal, and you're doing it for a specific reason. And all of those goals and priorities that you set also help with decision-making when you're setting those priorities. And I think if you look at it that way, you're able to then balance your goals across the two teams, and everybody then drives to the desired outcomes and not just participating in a new org chart.
Comprehensively insightful analysis there, Tim. Many, many thanks. I'm conscious of time. And do not want to sign off without getting Oriana's view of this. And last time we spoke to Oriana in this context, or at least concerning report installment part 1, turned out, Oriana, you'd basically been pursuing your own research in that very area. I don't know. I was curious if there was any crossover at all with what report part 2 looks at and anything you've done. And then more specifically, there is a mention in the report that AI could be leveraged to personalize onboarding and learning. And we're definitely interested in getting your take on that as well.
Yeah, so this isn't necessarily material that I'm personally working on, but it's definitely top of mind for the product organization, which means it is top of mind for me because we are thinking a lot about how do we provide people with the resources they need for things like onboarding, learning, and especially that kind of in-app, very contextual information that helps people to smooth their work processes, have really tailored recommendations, be informed about what it is they need to do, um, without relying on sort of outmoded and clunky systems like documentation that has to be kept up to date, things like that. So I think there are really great opportunities, and Nexthink is definitely investigating those. So I would say when it comes to the question of personalizing onboarding and learning, there's two specific applications that build off of each other. The first one is understanding the persona. So, who is the end user? What are their needs? And sometimes we think of that in terms of role, right? Like finance versus sales versus engineering. But it can also be things like new to the company versus very experienced, right? It can be new to a particular software, but experienced. And that type of nuance is something that you can get at a much more sophisticated level today than you could maybe in the past, where it was just, new versus old and department based. So we start to be able to understand people's needs much more specifically and then address those in context. So that's applying those insights to provide people with education and information that's hypercontextual, right? It's the little reminders in the product telling you something has changed, something has improved. There's a workflow that you can be using that sort of anticipates your needs. The thing that I always think about is sort of what we wish Clippy was. So anybody who was using computer in the 90s will remember Clippy, which was not particularly useful, but extremely cute and extremely annoying. But what if it were actually useful, right? I think the concept certainly appeals to people on a very emotional level, right? We have this idea of tiny, unobtrusive guides that are personable and relatable. We see it in video games, right? Um, we see it in science fiction, and I think that's sort of the mental image that we have, and that we can use as not necessarily the end point, but rather an inspiration for what it will look like to have more contextual information and guidance.
Imagine if Microsoft's AI tool launch was Clippy.
Oh, that would be
Clippy,
great.
the return of Clippy.
Right.
I think that would have been fantastic. That
Yeah.
would have been
I want my
brilliant.
own little R2D2 following me around, some little droid that can help me get through my day to day.
Exactly.
I just want Clippy. I just want Clippy. Oriana, great question for you to finish it off. And i- it's possible many of the job titles in the future HR IT department are positions we can't articulate today. Sure, but what career advice would you offer for anybody interested in working in the intersection between people and technology? And I have to say, what better person to ask? Because in a way, that describes your career and role, arguably, or Oriana, would you say?
Yes, absolutely. And I love this question. I love this topic. I think there's always a need for people who are genuinely excited by both people and technology and are able to bridge those gaps. It's something I've talked about with a number of our customers. So there are already starting to be those roles, right? At some of our more mature DEX teams or centers of excellence, I've spoken to people who do focus on the user experience of IT, for example. Um, and when I worked in IT, right, that's where I um, first got interested in working in technology. I had a boss who called me the human computer translator. Um, our digital communications team called me the product therapist. And I think these are sort of joking terms, but they really get at the heart of the matter, right? You need somebody who is passionate about understanding what do people need in order to interface with technology? What is the relevant experience that technology can deliver? And I think the people who are most effectively leveraging Nexthink and who are going to be able to leverage these new technologies as they arrive are the people who are thinking about change management from a human perspective, right? In terms of communications, like you were saying earlier, and really leveraging that ability to connect those dots and to bring those teams together and to come up with strategies for making that technology more human.
Beautifully said, Oriana, and beautifully said, everyone. And special shout out and thanks, Sean, for not only joining us today, but as ever, but for writing both fantastic reports. They've really done phenomenally well. It generated so much interest and engagement and input from customers and from listeners. They've been a pleasure to kind of delve into as well. And if you haven't yet downloaded part 1 and or part 2, just check the show notes. You can get them both right now for free, along with the latest Gartner Magic Quadrant, which I don't think we've even had a chance to discuss here yet, have we? It's been a busy time. But Nexthink did pretty well. Spoiler alert. Along with what else? Along with you can book now for Boston or London experience. And of course, you can listen to. You can go over. You can find a link to the parallel special podcast feed, or you can listen to the first 2 installments here, released over the last few weeks. If you haven't yet heard it, then be sure to let us know what you think as well. So it just remains for me to thank everybody once again for listening, and of course for joining.
Bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.
To make sure that you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast player. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, make sure to leave a rating of the show. Just tap the number of stars you think the podcast deserves. If you'd like to learn more about how Nexthink can help you improve your digital employee experience, head over to nexthink.com. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.